Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here with us today. I'm Hira Jalil, and I'm a visiting assistant professor at the Center for Animal Law Studies at Lewis and Clark Law School. I'm delighted to be moderating this webinar to discuss our newly released report titled A Comparative Analysis of Litigation Strategies in Brazil, India, Mexico, and Zimbabwe. This report is an outcome of the research conducted by students enrolled in the Farmed Animal Protection Project at Lewis and Clark Law School during the 24-25 academic year, who are also our panelists today. In terms of our agenda, I'll start off with talking a little bit about our work in the Farmed Animal Protection Project, as well as our vision and goals for the project we're discussing today. I will then introduce our four panelists really briefly, who will take turns presenting their research findings. Towards the end of the webinar, I will share some cross-cutting themes and takeaways from the report. We'll conclude with a moderated Q&A. So if you have any questions as the panelists present or towards the end, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A chat and we can get to them at the end of the webinar or towards the end of the webinar. The Farmed Animal Protection Project offers Lewis and Clark law students a two-semester experiential learning opportunity to concentrate on farmed animal protection and to develop lawyering and other professional skills used by animal protection advocates. At the end of the academic year, projects produced through this course are shared with the public to increase awareness and to aid other farmed animal advocacy efforts within the movement. The report we're discussing today is the Farmed Animal Protection Project's first public-facing research output. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to talk a little bit about our goals for this project. Industrial animal agriculture, or factory farming or concentrated animal feeding operations, depending on what you call it, has become one of the most defining and troubling features of the global food system. This system, marked by intensification, mechanization, and vertical integration, attempts to maximize animal production while minimizing costs. Unfortunately, the global industrial animal ag industry has been extremely successful in accomplishing its goal of raising record-breaking numbers of animals. Each year, approximately 85 billion land animals are slaughtered for food around the world, the vast majority being chickens, followed by pigs, sheep, and cows. Factory farming, as some of you might call the system, imposes steep and well-documented costs. It confines animals in extreme restrictive conditions that prevent natural behaviors and normalizes painful procedures such as castration, debeaking, and dehorning without anesthesia. It also drives major environmental harms, including deforestation, biodiversity loss, and water pollution from manure and chemical runoff, while nearby communities face noxious odors and elevated risks of respiratory illness and allergies. The animal ag sector is a significant contributor to climate change through methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide emissions across the supply chain. And lastly, factory farming also creates serious public health and worker safety risks, from accelerating antimicrobial resistance through routine non-therapeutic use of antibiotics to increasing zoonotic disease emergence, while at the same time exposing workers to dangerous conditions and exploitation. The modern day industrial animal ag system originated in Europe and was refined in the US. Now, this system is rapidly spreading to other parts of the world, in part driven by an increased demand for meat consumption. In light of this, it's increasingly important for advocates to try and combat industrial animal agriculture in these other countries before it becomes entrenched in their cultural and political fabric. One of the many ways to do this is to use legal tools at our disposal, like litigation. However, while we do have some animal law litigation research in the US and EU, there remains this analytical gap around how litigation strategies are deployed by populous low and middle income countries or global south countries. This project seeks to fill that gap by examining litigation strategies in 4 different countries: Brazil, India, Mexico, and Zimbabwe. These countries were selected for this research because they represent a mix of regions and are major agricultural producers. Additionally, while each jurisdiction has its own unique challenges, our goal was to select a sample of countries representative of the barriers facing the global south in balancing economic growth, food security, and animal welfare. Through this project, we aim to address how legal strategies and approaches in these four countries have succeeded or failed in combating industrialized animal farming and what legal or sociocultural factors influence these outcomes. A quick note about our research methodology. While the panelists here undertook much of the research and drafting of the report, they did consult individual country experts during the course of the research to ensure that we were getting the legalities right and that we were appropriately sensitive to any cultural and political nuances. Additionally, each report was reviewed by an external reviewer who was also a legal expert from that country to ensure accuracy. We'd like to thank all of the country experts and reviewers for their time and their feedback on this project. Moving on, our panelists, who authored individual country report chapters, will present their findings. Without further ado, I'll quickly introduce our panelists in order of presentation. Their full bios will be posted in the chat for you to read, and you can also find a link to the full country report and its companion project overview in the chat. Brittany Bennett will kick off by presenting her findings on Brazil. Miranda Harold, who graduated from Lewis and Clark Law School last spring, will talk about India. Oswald Marundedzi and Franny von Friedeberg, who co-authored the chapter on Zimbabwe, will present their findings on Zimbabwe. And lastly, but definitely not least, we have Valeria Picasso Samaripa, who's a veterinarian with experience in large animal medicine and who will talk about animal law litigation in Mexico. Over to you, Brittany.
Hey everyone, my name is Brittany Bennett. I'm a law student at Lewis and Clark, and I am the author of this report section on Brazil. Next slide. So I want to start by framing Brazil in the context of animal agriculture, and Brazil is definitely a global leader in this sector. It is one of only 3 countries that is responsible for nearly half of all animals that are slaughtered worldwide, which makes Brazil both a high volume producer and consumer of animal products, with chickens, pigs, and cattle being farmed the most. And because of this scale, animal agriculture is also a main driver of illegal deforestation in Brazil. Overall, industrialization of farming practices is pervasive across all species, and the shift towards confinement is accelerating. Next. So the span of the beef, dairy, poultry, and pork industries provides a perspective on Brazil's influence in agriculture. In the beef industry, Brazil is one of the world's largest beef exporters with more than 200 million cattle. There's an estimated 43 million cattle who are slaughtered annually, with 7 million in confinement. And feedlots often meet or exceed thresholds of US CAFOs, with nearly 90% of cattle confined or coming from operations with over 1,000 head. Cattle ranching is a major driver of illegal deforestation in Brazil, and an estimated 70% of deforested land in the Amazon is used for cattle pasture. Next. Brazil also has a large dairy industry. Globally, it has the 3rd largest dairy herd and is the 6th largest milk producer. There is also an active shift here away from pasture-based models and toward confinement systems. Next. In Brazil's poultry industry, an estimated 6 billion broiler chickens are slaughtered annually, making it the 2nd largest poultry meat producer. And large farms can house over 100,000 birds. And for eggs, laying hens are mainly confined in conventional cage systems, with an estimated 95% of laying hens in battery cages. Next slide. Finally, we turn to Brazil's pork industry. It is the 4th largest pork producer in the world, and it has 41 million pigs raised in over 30,000 farms, with 70% of them being raised in confinement. And among those, 1.5 million breeding sows are confined in gestation crates. So, all of this industry context helps to show how much of a powerhouse Brazil is in industrial animal agriculture. And this scale makes Brazil a critical jurisdiction for litigation that aims to address environmental, public health, and animal welfare harms of industrial agriculture. Additionally, Brazil stands out because it is one of few countries in the world with the constitution establishing animal protections. And animal protection cases don't really face legal standing as a principal barrier because Brazilian courts have repeatedly recognized animals' sentience and their legal rights. So, to piece this together, Brazil has a relatively robust framework of environmental laws that provides opportunities to regulate pollution, habitat destruction, and animal health. Brazil's agricultural policies and regulations are enforced by the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, and Food Supply. However, there is often inconsistent enforcement because agencies are facing pressure from the powerful agribusiness sector. So, two relevant laws important to highlight are Article 225 of Brazil's Constitution and the Environmental Crimes Law. Brazil's constitution enshrines protection for animals by explicitly prohibiting all practices that subject animals to cruelty, and it also guarantees a right to an ecologically balanced environment and imposes a duty on the government to defend and to preserve the environment. The Environmental Crimes Law stipulates crimes and their penalties related to wildlife and endangered species. It also penalizes pollution, habitat destruction, and environmental harm, and prohibits the abuse, mistreatment, injury, or mutilation of wild or domesticated animals. And this is the only federal law in Brazil that expressly protects domesticated animals. Using Brazil's legal framework to challenge industrial farming provides some promising themes that we see in litigation. The first concerns pollution and environmental harm. And litigation in this realm has often targeted environmental damage and pollution caused by pig and cattle operations in Brazil, linking to issues such as water contamination, waste mismanagement, air quality, and deforestation. Judges here have recognized that even the potential for harm to human health or ecosystems can suffice to establish liability. So, this expansive interpretation of the environmental crimes law demonstrates the judiciary's willingness to use pollution laws as a check on industrial agriculture. Another prominent theme that we see is the challenge to live animal export. Advocates have argued in this realm that the inherent cruelty of transport violates Brazil's legal protections for animals. Although victories in this area have been short-lived due to industry pressure and some political pushback, these cases have elevated farmed animal welfare in public debate and have underscored the suffering inherent in global meat supply chains. Finally, litigation has exposed weaknesses in regulatory oversight, such as scrutinizing when government responsibilities for inspection and enforcement have been delegated to the agricultural industry itself. Courts have grappled with whether this delegation undermines constitutional duties to protect the environment and to prevent animal cruelty. It also highlights regulatory capture and the ongoing tensions between state obligations and industry influence. So, examining the scale of animal agriculture in Brazil, this country's legal framework, and the relevant litigation themes reveal some important insights. Brazil has strong constitutional hooks that provide a direct basis for challenging aspects of animal confinement, transport, slaughter, and regulation. Environmental law is a useful tool because industrial animal agriculture is deeply tied to deforestation, pollution, and zoonotic disease. Courts have also shown a willingness to treat risk as harm, recognition of animal suffering, and skepticism toward industry-dominated oversight. Aligning animal welfare advocacy with the broader environmental and social movements can also expand its impact. Overall, we reached the following four key takeaways. First, for advocates, Brazil demonstrates the value of framing litigation around environmental and public health harms, supplemented by arguments on animal welfare. Second, leveraging Article 225 of the Constitution and the Environmental Crimes Law offers promising avenues. Third, success requires connecting litigation, agency engagement, and public advocacy to ensure rulings are implemented and also resistant to industry pushback. And finally, the ongoing struggle with regulatory oversight may prove especially critical for shaping the future of animal agriculture governance in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And next up, we have Miranda Herod, who will talk about some of the overarching research findings from India.
Hi, everyone. I'm really thankful for everyone's interest in this topic today. Next slide, please. So India is a really important country to be looking at in this context, just in terms of the numbers. So India is the most populous nation in the world, with about 17% of the world's population. It's comprised of 28 states and 8 union territories, and you see a lot of different landscapes within each individual state and their perspectives towards animal agriculture and how developed certain industries are. So it's just like a very diverse landscape. As a country, India is the largest dairy consumer in the world. And also, I think that the stereotype is to think of India as a vegetarian nation, and this is kind of an oversimplification. Only around 20% of the population is vegetarian, and that is shifting with increasing globalization and industrialization. There's a growing demand for animal products, and India is both importing and exporting animal products at a higher rate than in the past. So this is definitely a space to watch. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into every different type of animal farmed in India. So I'll just do some like general takeaways. So the main takeaway is that there's increasing consolidation in all of these different industries. And for chickens and pigs, those are the most already like very consolidated models, but you see less intensive systems such as like ducks and sheep and goats. There's pressure from the government and from industry to intensify those systems to maximize productivity of the animals. And of course, in that, there is little attention given to the well-being of the animals. You also, with the consolidation, you see what used to be small farmers and their livelihoods being co-opted into these, more extractive supply chains. And you have a lot more animals in a lot smaller areas of land, and then that brings up both waste issues and then also the use of antibiotics, which has troubling implications for public health. So in terms of litigation trends generally, with cows, many states in India have anti-slaughter legislation in place, and although this might seem like a win as animal advocates, there are unfortunate consequences even from anti-slaughter bans, such as if there's a state with a slaughter ban on the books, you can just bring your cows to a different state across state lines. So that is subjecting these animals to long and arduous journeys. Also, it's expensive to keep cows alive, and a lot of small farmers can't support cows that are no longer producing milk. And that's an important note too, is that unlike in the US, where the dairy and beef industries are separate populations of cows, in India, those two sectors are one and the same. So spent dairy cows will then become beef in states that don't have cattle slaughter bans on the books. In terms of chickens, although it's highly concentrated positively, there have been state level wins banning battery cages. So that's great, and advocates have been working really hard to get those great rulings on the books. You do see a problem with enforcement and follow-up, and just there's this idea that non-cage models are more expensive to maintain, so you just, change is slow. Similarly with pigs, there are about 20 states that have bans for farrowing crates, so that's fabulous news. But again, the landscape varies a lot by state, and also there is an enforcement problem. Next slide, please. So briefly, some interesting features of India's legal system that kind of, as someone with a, like a US background, it was just noteworthy and different. So first, suo motu power. So the high courts and the Supreme Courts in India can take up cases like from their own power. And we've seen the high courts do that with animal interest issues, which is great to see, courts reckoning that this is a real concern. Second, the National Green Tribunal is a court in India that is specifically equipped to consider environmental claims. And I think this is very positive because, for instance, cases involving cows, it's been interesting to see how the National Green Tribunal reckons with the issues of greenwashing. So, of course, if you have a lot of cows together on a small piece of land, there's the issue of waste. And the industry will say, well, it's great because it's fertilizer. And that's, who doesn't, it's great for the cows, it's great for people, it's great for crops, but that kind of ignores the reality of once you have such a large quantity of waste, you can't actually apply that to cropland. And so the National Green Tribunal has been able to kind of look beneath the eco-friendly veneer from industry and, actually be like, well, how are we going to deal with this problem? Another positive, unlike the US, India has an agency that is specifically tasked with animal welfare. So that's the Animal Welfare Board of India. It was established through the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. So it's really great that there is an agency that can bring cases on the behalf of animals, and they have inspection power, so they can go into slaughterhouses and make sure that rules are being followed. Of course, with agencies generally, there is a problem of understaffing and their agency capture and lack of resources. So it's just it's great to have these institutions in place. Whether they are properly funded and supported and held accountable is another issue. I'm going to go on to the constitutional provisions. India has the longest written constitution in the world, and not all constitutional provisions are equal in that you have like your fundamental rights. So one of those positively, there's a fundamental right to a clean environment and the right to life. Article 21 has been interpreted broadly and expanding to giving animals inherent dignity in their lives. Again, like that's great in principle. In practice, animal interests are often the first to go by the wayside when human interests are at stake. You also have directive principles, which are, like telling states how to make legislation. Those aren't legally binding per se, but they're kind of guiding states in like how to organize animal husbandry and things like that. And then there also are duties in the Constitution where every citizen has a duty for environmental stewardship. And then seeing like how these different types of constitutional provisions interact with each other is really interesting because you can have reasonable restrictions on even the fundamental rights. And you see that often in cases where industry is kind of put up against either like human interest or even animal interests, because you can make reasonable restrictions to the fundamental rights as long as it aids the more powerful institutions. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to wrap up with a couple trends and takeaways that I'm seeing. So on the bright side, there is a lot for advocates to use. There's a lot in the books. This once you have the tools, that's really great. On the downside, it's like a positive ruling even is only the start rather than the end, because you have to make sure that people actually listen. And that was a trend I saw where, there'd be this great ruling or this, like the battery cage wins, anti-battery cages, but then there was like an enforcement issue where people would just kind of continue. Or same thing with like unlicensed dairies. You'd see, like this dairy should shut down, but then it just continues to operate. So advocates have to be tireless and, constantly be like, hey, to the agency, and can you enforce this? Rather than just being like, we did it. We got a great rule, or we got a great, this judge really liked us. Also, with the more animal interest, animal rights focused cases, you often see those running into more social and political backlash, and you see really positive rulings that kind of go broadly towards giving animals like inherent dignity and recognizing that. But then those don't always stay in the books for long because industry is really talented at pushing back. And so the more promising avenue seems to be focusing on environmental and human health, and then kind of, sliding in the animal interest stuff as like a subsidiary to that. And then also working with agencies to develop really good rules on the front end, and then being able to like use kind of the carrot and stick approach. So, like work with the agencies to make good rules and make sure the agencies are enforcing the rules, and kind of use the stick of litigation as a last resort. So I'm out of time. Thank you so much. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for giving that overview of a very complex jurisdiction. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, we don't really have a lot of time. Obviously, it's a really complicated, lengthy report, but so we just have 10 minutes to provide overviews. However, if you do have questions, we'd love to take them at the end. So you can pop your questions into the Q&A chat. We see we have a couple already. And that will kind of help us engage more with things that might be of interest to our attendees. Moving on, we have Oswald and Franny talking about Zimbabwe. Both of them are co-authors of the Zimbabwe report. Over to you.
Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. So my name is Franny, and I'm going to be looking at the current agriculture landscape in Zimbabwe. We can go to the next slide. So livestock production is Zimbabwe's largest employer and second largest export industry, making it an economically central industry. The agriculture sector was once dominated by smallholder farming, but after Zimbabwe's 2008 economic crisis, which caused agricultural collapse and increased food insecurity across the country, the market shifted and is continuing to shift away from these smallholder farms towards industrialization and commercialization. Today, Zimbabwe's population is close to 17 million, and agriculture is seeing a high demand both within the industry and from the government to really boost agricultural production. But as this demand for animal products rises, so do questions about animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and those are coupled with concerns over visibility and regulation within the industry. The last agricultural census took place in 1980, and it was only last September that Zimbabwe, together with the Food and Agriculture Organization, began conducting another census, which is slated to be published sometime later this year. We're now going to look a little closer at some of these concerns facing the primary animals of Zimbabwe's agricultural landscape. So we can go to the next slide. So we'll first look at cattle. So as of 2023, there were an estimated 5.5 million cattle in Zimbabwe, made up of both beef and dairy cattle. Beef is a major industry in the country and is cited as one of the top 10 exports. As of now, 89% of beef production and cattle are still raised by small-scale farmers on communal farms that have open grazing lands. But in contrast, the dairy industry is comprised of both large-scale and communal farms. However, 98% of dairy production comes from these large-scale farms. And compared to the robust beef industry of Zimbabwe, the dairy industry from an export perspective is on decline. We'll go to the next slide. So Zimbabwe's poultry industry is made up of broiler and egg-laying chickens, as well as indigenous species like fowls and turkeys that are bred for climate resilience. Zimbabwe's poultry is currently driven by multiple small-scale informal producers. Roughly 7 out of every 10 farmers will have chickens, even if it's not their primary operation, because it's becoming a very lucrative field. And while there are some prohibitions in Zimbabwe against unnecessarily confining animals, this protection is very limited in its application towards chickens and is even more so significantly under-enforced because of the large amount of existing chicken farmers. So as a result, most chickens are housed in concentrated animal feeding operations and confined to battery cages. In fact, poultry represents the largest growing CAFO industry in Zimbabwe. So we can go to the next slide. So pigs in Zimbabwe, there are roughly 300,000 pigs currently in the agriculture system. Similar to the poultry industry, pig production is increasingly turning into concentrated feeding systems to meet this high demand. There are no laws currently in place that prohibit the use of farrowing or gestation crates, and the only welfare standard for pigs is the Zimbabwe Quality Assured Pork Certification Scheme, which was a scheme enacted by one of the largest pig producers in the country, and it's a system where farmers can obtain a certification if they follow certain guidelines and have routine visits by licensed veterinarians and officers. But the program is completely optional and there's no proper enforcement mechanism. And because it was set up by one of the largest pork producers, the system is really about maintaining sanitation standards for meat processing rather than concerns over animal welfare. We can go to the next slide. So goats, so there are roughly 3 to 4 million goats farmed in Zimbabwe each year. Goats are also usually still driven by these small-scale farming operations. However, similar to the above species, just seeing an increase in desire to grow the industry and industrialize it. And this is also because goats require a much lower cost to raise in comparison to other livestock like cattle. We can go to the next slide. So crocodile, Zimbabwe holds 45% of the global market for crocodile skin exports and is considered to be one of the largest exporters of crocodile skins in the world. All crocodiles are held in really concentrated feeding operations and are farmed for their meat, oil, and skin. And next slide. And finally, the last major animal are fish. So the two farm species are the Nile tilapia and the rainbow trout. And the fish production industry is also rapidly increasing, and fish are farmed in cages in lakes and ponds and from both the industrial and subsistence levels to accommodate growing demand. Next. Now I'll turn it over to Oswald.
Thank you so much, Franny. I'm going to be discussing about the litigation strategies that animal welfare. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in order for one to understand the available litigation strategies, you would have to understand the current court system we have in Zimbabwe. And the lowest court we have is the magistrate court. And this is basically where you can go with small claims and try to litigate any issue as long as it's below 50,000 United States dollars. And if your matter is considered to be a bit more complex or above the monetary jurisdiction of the $50,000 threshold, you can approach the High Court in Zimbabwe. And this court has inherent jurisdiction to preside over criminal and civil matter. So it can be environmental or animal issues for any matter. And this is the court of choice for most animal law advocates so that they don't have to debate or litigate on questions of jurisdiction. And if a person is not satisfied with whatever judgment they get from the High Court, they can approach the Supreme Court, which is the final court of appeals. So as you mentioned on first instance, you would have to be approaching it on the basis of being unsatisfied with the decision you obtain from a lower court. And above the Supreme Court, we have the Constitutional Court, which I would like to term the biggest court in Zimbabwe because it is the one that presides over the most serious cases, including presidents and violations of constitutional rights. The person is claiming that a certain act is violating constitutional rights, including issues that affect animals. You can approach the Constitutional Court, although at the moment they in a case where somebody has approached the Constitutional Court. Next slide, please. So we have several statutes in Zimbabwe that animal advocates can use to advance animal rights and welfare. And the supreme relevant piece of legislation is the Constitution, and this is the supreme law of the land. And the most relevant section in our Constitution is probably Section 73, which speaks to environmental rights. And it basically states that every person has the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being, and to have the environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations through reasonable legislative and other measures that prevent pollution and ecological degradation, promote conservation, and secure ecologically sustainable development and use of natural resources while promoting economic and social development. So you will note that our constitution doesn't have a specific clause that grants animals rights. And the only section which you could probably use to advance animal rights or protect their welfare is section 73, because it speaks to ecological degradation, prevention of pollution. This is the only relevant clause in the constitution that animal advocates can use at the moment. And the next act that is of relevance in the promotion of animal rights in Zimbabwe is the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, Chapter 1909. So this is an act which was promulgated in 1960, and that alone is problematic because it means from 1960 we really haven't developed our legal framework on the prevention of cruelty to animals, and we've been relying on an act which was made before the country of Zimbabwe was even born. This was an act which was made when Zimbabwe was still called Rhodesia, and up to now it is yet to be developed to reflect modern day issues such as concentrated animal feeding operations. And I would say perhaps the most important thing animal advocates have to do in Zimbabwe at the moment is to try to lobby for the amendment of this act to reflect modern day issues such as concentrated animal feeding operations, as we are now seeing an increase in the number of KFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, being run in Zimbabwe. And after that, we have the Animal Health Act. And I would say, for the purpose of trying to promote animal rights, this act shows fault on a lot of things, because what it does is make provision for things that people should do to make sure that the meat that is consumed by people is safe and healthy. But it really doesn't speak to the promotion of animal rights in a way. And the most important act, I believe, is the Environmental Management Act. Why? This is the only act which most environmental law organizations have used to advance or claim violations of animal welfare or animal rights, even though we don't really have them in the constitution. For instance, there's a particular case called Zilla versus Angin. It was by an environmental law organization group where they approached the High Court in Zimbabwe and said that a certain mine was polluting rivers, which was making it, which was creating a difficult situation for animals as they no longer had any way to obtain safe water. And we have several cases like that where people use the Environmental Management Act to allege or claim that pollution coming out from mines was making water unsafe for drinking for animals. And at the moment, I would say this act is probably the most relevant in the protection of animal rights. And Council's Act from the Harams are only used to advance a human-centric approach towards animal welfare. These acts have a lot of provisions saying meat should be, animals should be killed in slaughterhouses which look like this so that human beings can eat safe meat, but they don't really speak to the concept of animal rights. Next slide, please. So the challenges we currently have is, at the moment, the constitution doesn't have any clause which speaks to animal rights. And as a result, it's very difficult to approach a court and say this act is violating a right that an animal has. And secondly, most people in Zimbabwe still view animals from a cultural perspective where animals are seen as assets. And the problem
Hi,
with that is when
Oswald.
people
I'm
look
so
at
sorry
something as
to
an asset,
interrupt.
it's difficult.
We're a little bit short on time. So just like a heads up for 30 seconds.
My
Yeah.
apologies. My
Yeah.
apologies. Let me round up. So the major challenges we have right now is that there's no constitutional protection, and we do not have animal law enforcement officers, and this makes it difficult for people to track and audit how animals are being treated in Zimbabwe. Next slide, please. So the possible solutions we have are obviously to try and create an animal enforcement police framework where we have specialized law enforcement officers investigating cases of animal abuse, similar to the way we have created anti-poaching units, which basically protect wild animals from poachers. And we also have to lobby for the recognition of animal rights in the Constitution, since we are only able to do so from an environmental law perspective. But once we have animal rights in the Constitution, I think it would be much easier to approach courts and claim violation of rights where they happen. But other than that, I thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much, Professor Hira.
Thank you, Oswald. And finally, we have Valeria talking about Mexico.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you also to Kals, to Professor Jalil, and to all my fellow panelists today. So I'm going to be talking about Mexico, which happens to be my country. So I'm excited about this. Next slide, please. And I will start by just sharing some important details about Mexico as a country, and then I'll go into the industrial animal agriculture framework. So it's the third largest country in all Latin America. We have around 130 million people, abundant natural resources, a very diverse geography with a wide range of climate zones and ecosystems. We also have a rich cultural history. We are among the 15 largest economies in the world, and notably, cattle farming occupies over half of our national territory. Now, in terms of industrial animal ag, we are sadly among the world's top livestock producers. We are also seeing this general trend towards expansion, more intensive operations, vertically integrated, large scale, especially for poultry pigs. We are the fifth largest egg producer at a global level. We have the highest per capita annual consumption of eggs, which is quite alarming. And 90% of our laying hens are kept in cages. So we have no crate-free, no cage-free regulations presently. The use of cages is still predominant, especially for poultry, sows, and rabbits. And customary husbandry practices such as debeaking, castration in pigs are still routinely performed without anesthetics. I'm not going to mention every animal, but just to give an overview, around 5 million birds, 4 million cows, and 2.5 million pigs are slaughtered annually. Something that's quite unique, not only of Mexico, but also of other Latin American countries, especially for tropical areas, are what we call dual purpose systems, which are characterized by milk production. These are for cattle, and production too. So this is quite a different framework than in the US. And I'm happy to talk about this a bit more in the Q&A if anyone has any questions about this. And well, despite all of this dire facts that I just shared, we are the Latin American country with most people that follow a plant-based diet, according to a study. According to a different study that compared Australia, Canada, the US, and the UK with Mexico, a high percentage of vegans. And this also shows our willingness to try new foods. So potentially there could be a market for cultured meat in the future. In terms of our food systems, we do have a Mesoamerican legacy that's rooted in plant-centered food systems. But currently, our cuisine, our recipes are more post-colonial use of meat, for example, dishes that are based in pigs, sadly. Next slide, please. Now I will talk about some of the relevant legislation, but first I will start by saying that since Mexico is a former Spanish colony, we do follow a civil law system. This means that the texts of the laws are closely examined, the interpretations are debated, and so statutory codes have significantly more detail than in common law systems, just a distinction with the US. Now, one of our challenges is that our laws often are not implemented. There's a lack of enforcement, so a very big enforcement gap there, and oversight remains a critical issue. There's also limited agency capacity. SADER is the equivalent to the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. It stands for Secretariat of Agriculture and Rural Development, and they are tasked with ensuring production and supply of food. And we'll talk about it a bit more in the cases section. But three main laws, there's other laws too that relate to animals, but three main ones are the Federal Animal Health Act. This is the basis for other animal welfare legislation, and it mandates the 5 freedoms for all animals. It provides a framework for animal health and food safety. However, it's more so to ensure public health via animal health. Then the NOM 033, that regulates the methods for humane slaughter in animals used for food, research, testing, education, and even wild animals in captivity. And it basically aims to minimize pain, anxiety, and stress during slaughter. And lastly, we have the Animal Protection Law of Mexico City, which was recently passed, 2022. And it's the only law in the country that recognizes that animals have certain rights. It also dictates the 5 freedoms, and it protects animals, including farmed animals, prevents mistreatment, mutilations, physical alterations for aesthetic purposes, cruelty, zoophilia, and other things. And some states have recognized animals as sentient in their local constitutions. All states have anti-cruelty statutes or have criminalized abuse to some extent in their penal codes, but only 3 cover farmed animals in terms of their raising. And currently we have no federal anti-cruelty laws, but in December 2024, the president signed a set of constitutional amendments that formally recognize and mention animals. So that's quite a historic moment for Mexico. It will set us apart from other countries. It acknowledges the inherent value of all animals. They're all worthy of respect and protection. And basically three reforms that involve changes to 3 articles. Article 73, I'll go very briefly over this, but I think it's important to mention since it's such a big moment. Article 73 allows Congress clear authority to create legislation on animal welfare and protection. This opens the door to a future general or federal animal welfare law for all animals. Article 4 prohibits mistreatment, and Article 3 mandates the inclusion of animal welfare education in schools. So it's still too early to know how this will progress, but it will provide, like all the reforms to the Constitution will provide more uniform regulations. It's a future avenue for litigation too, and it basically recognizes the state's responsibility to safeguard animal welfare or animal well-being. Next slide, please. And as I was saying, with these new enshrinements, all animals will be included. Well, all animals are included already in the Constitution. There has been a law initiative introduced in the Chamber of Deputies to create this federal animal welfare law that I was talking about. in which we will set the floor, and then the states can progress up from there. And that's it for this slide. Can we move on? And as far as litigation, I will briefly, I know we're out of time, mention some of the cases that were recurring. Courts have been asked to evaluate agency accountability, so compliance with existing animal welfare standards via amparo actions. These are constitutional remedies, and they compel agencies such as SADER that I was mentioning before to carry out oversight, their oversight responsibilities or duties. The cases have also, well, cases that I found important have also relied on the courts balancing animal protection laws with cultural expression and religious freedom. For example, with religious rituals or Santeria, bullfighting cases. There has also been a push for better regulation of industrial farming, especially within the poultry and egg production industry, to regulate better cage versus cage-free versus free range. So advocates want stronger oversight too. And I already mentioned what amparo actions are. If anyone has any questions, happy to go over that too in a bit more detail. And agency accountability, as I said, has been a recurring theme. Next slide, please. And this is just very briefly a case in Homun, Yucatan, that I really like because it incorporates an eco-justice framework viewed from a human lens perspective too, in which plaintiffs are guardians of cenotes. Cenotes are naturally occurring freshwater sinkholes in this particular area. Mayan community, including youth, were plaintiffs to this case, and they basically halted the expansion or the authorization of a pig farm that housed over 49,000 pigs, given environmental arguments and indigenous rights perspective. So it was quite a good case. And that's it. When we go to the next slide, please. For the key takeaways, I will just briefly pause there so everyone can take a look. I won't go into any of these any further. I know we're out of time, but basically incremental welfare gains are more likely to succeed than rights-based claims. And we have to navigate sensitivities, both cultural and religious practices, as we litigate. And this is it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Val. Just a reminder, please pop your questions in the chat using the Q&A function because you won't be able to unmute yourself and ask questions. So all the questions have to be put in the chat. Thank you again to each of our panelists for those really thoughtful country deep dives. And I'm just going to really quickly wrap up with some cross-cutting themes and takeaways. One thing that comes through very clearly in these reports is that while all four countries have very different political economies, legal systems, cultural contexts, the underlying trajectory of industrial animal agriculture is very similar. So like rapidly intensifying, especially in poultry and pork, increasing vertical integration, widespread reliance on intensive confinement, routine painful procedures, weak or uneven enforcement of existing laws. So that's just common across all four countries. And so ultimately, even though litigation outcomes are mixed, there are some consistent themes that we can see across these jurisdictions. Firstly, when courts are asked to intervene, we repeatedly saw that the arguments that tended to be most successful were the ones framed through environmental protection and public health lenses, such as pollution, sanitation, licensing, disease risk, etc. On the other hand, litigation that relied primarily on animal welfare or rights can produce cases that contain really landmark language, but those cases can then trigger backlash or political countermeasures. So the impact could be a little bit uncertain there. And I know that might seem disappointing to those of us who just want courts to take animal suffering seriously, but Personally, I think it can also present a strategic opportunity to demonstrate to courts how much harm factory farming actually causes, right? Because by connecting animal welfare harms to pollution or public health risks, lawyers can help bring animal welfare arguments before judges who are used to understanding those other legal harms more than animal welfare harms. Secondly, across all four countries, one of the most reliable causes of action for litigation tends to be actually something that might be very familiar to lawyers in the room, which is administrative law, right? So agency action or inaction. Agencies consistently fail to enforce their duties that already exist on paper, and lawyers can go after them for that. And we see advocates using different procedural vehicles like public interest litigation, amparo style constitutional remedies, other court initiated avenues to obtain orders that, in substance, are basically about asking the agencies to do their job, monitoring them, rulemaking, licensing, oversight, etc. And so I will conclude by saying that although our focus was on litigation, we do recognize that litigation is but one tool to try and protect farmed animals. Our research tries to evaluate where litigation can be successful and where it can lead to backlash, and how it can complement other tools that are available to animal advocates, like organizing, policy advocacy, public awareness campaigns. Also, if you're interested in this topic, we have some country experts from this research, including Paula Cardoso from Brazil and Gauri Moleki from India, discussing litigation strategies in their jurisdictions at the Center for Animal Law Studies' fourth annual Comparative Animal Law Symposium being held on March 17th and 18th of this year. The link is in the chat. Registration hasn't opened yet, but you can check back once that happens. With that, we'll open it up to the audience, and we're happy to take your questions. Please post them using the Q&A box on your screens. Okay, so the first question we have is, I'm using machine learning and satellite imaging to locate industrial poultry and pig farms globally to illustrate the true scale and spread of the system. Would numbers and locations of these farms be useful for litigation or not? I can kind of start that. I can take that one to start off, and then if anybody wants to jump in, please feel free to do so. I think for sure it is very, very helpful. It is especially helpful when you're trying to link like the harms of factory farms to harms to communities. So, for example, there's been some litigation in the US talking about how air pollution or water pollution from these industrialized concentrated animal feeding operations can really harm nearby communities, can cause illnesses, can cause respiratory distress, etc. And so one way that I can just off the top of my head think about how the location of specific farms can be helpful is for this purpose, right? To show that there are nearby communities who might be vulnerable, who might be disadvantaged, who are having to bear the brunt of these harms. Another avenue I can think of is, like Val talked about in her presentation, sometimes factory farms can be placed dangerously close to really sensitive ecosystems or really sensitive spots or locations that you advocates might want to protect and that the government might have an interest in protecting as well. And so finding out exactly what the location of these facilities are can be helpful in that sense as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in and add to that.
I think from like a public awareness perspective, that's really important, especially because at least in the United States, I don't know how it is elsewhere, but the industry tries really hard to like hide the true extent. So I think that just in terms of raising awareness, that is definitely essential.
Okay, thank you. So the next question we have is, what is the UN's position on animal rights? Does anyone want to take that one, or should I take it? Okay, I'll take it. So the UN's position on animal rights is, well, there really isn't a UN instrument that recognizes animal rights as such. There is a Universal Declaration on Animal Welfare, but that's not so. So just to briefly answer that question because I want to get to as many as we can. The UN doesn't have any instrument that, and all countries have, or a majority of countries have signed that supports animal rights. That is something that's being worked on. Animal welfare is specifically being worked on, especially the One Health and One Welfare framework post the COVID-19 pandemic. But yeah, right now there's no like international treaty on the books that supports animal rights. Okay, next up. Do your legislatures, courts, and executives look at what other nations are doing? There's a sentiment among some decision makers in the US that we should not look at other legal systems. Does anyone want to take that one?
I think that's really hard. I wish that our government was more receptive to looking to see what other countries are doing. Um, yeah, so I mean, maybe not in this administration, maybe at like a state level, other like state representatives might be more interested to see what other places are doing. But yeah, I think that that's a great point to flag that it's not really happening right now.
In your research, did any of you come across cases that cited other countries, case law from other countries?
Well,
Yeah.
in Zimbabwe, I would say that the general rule is we can quote any case law from any English law country. So it can be America, it can be South Africa. We share jurisprudence, and where the court is presented with a case that has no precedence in Zimbabwe, let's say you come up with a claim that is alleging something that the court has never yet to litigate over, then the court immediately jumps to other jurisdictions to see how they have presided over such cases. And so to answer the question is procedurally, the courts are supposed to. And this is also in terms of our constitution, which says you are actually supposed to develop the common law by looking at what other English law jurisdictions are doing. So in terms of the constitution, the judges are obliged to develop the common law by looking at how others are doing it, instead of just saying this is what we do here and we don't look at what others are doing.
Yeah, Miranda, did you have something to add to that?
Oh, just yeah, the same thing. You see Indian courts also like with the citing other jurisdictions case law, but then also kind of talking about the One Health theory and kind of, these developmental principles. Like, so you do have this kind of global discourse about how we approach animal welfare. And, you know, that's something that it's heartening to see this cross-jurisdictional focus on promoting it and taking it seriously.
Thank you. Next up, in your discussion of Mexico, Val highlighted the use of amparo actions and constitutional reforms to advance animal welfare. How do these litigation strategies compare to the US? Are they similar to class action in the US?
Yes, so I'm happy to answer that. And also, this might answer a bit of Susanna's question with regards to citizen suit provisions in the US. So, yes, amparo actions in Mexico are quite common. They are judicial actions that protect an individual or a group of individuals from acts or omissions of authorities. These acts or omissions violate constitutional guarantees of these individuals, and that's how they can put forward a case. However, something to mention about amparos, and I'm glad that you asked, Alex, is that I think more than 60% get dismissed. So litigation, I mean, it's a tool, but it is imperfect. And you must prove as an individual that you have legitimate interest in the case. So similar to standing in the US, and this is not quite clear as to how to determine if you have legitimate interest. And with regards to the US, I think a class action basically allows one or more citizens to file prosecute a lawsuit on behalf of a group, which is a class. So I think in a way they're similar. I'm not sure about the percentage of like of wins or how they compare to Amparo in that case. But yes, Amparos is a very useful strategy, and we use it quite a lot in Mexico.
Yeah, and I will quickly add that actually to address actually both Susanna and Alex's questions. One, I think Amparo, from what how Val kind of explained it and from our research, it sounds like it's more similar to writs of mandamus or maybe like suits under the APA where you're challenging the agency's action or inaction. Although, it's a constitutional remedy, so I would say it's more similar to a writ of mandamus than an APA lawsuit because it's not derived from statute. And Susanna, that's one thing that we did notice, and I think Brittany maybe did mention it at the top, that standing generally seems to be in all of the jurisdictions that we looked at seems to be not as big of a hurdle as it is in the US because of various. So, for example, in India, we have something called suo motu jurisdiction and public interest litigation, where you can basically try and establish that a suit or a case is in the interest of the public, or the Supreme Court can even on its own behalf take a case up. And so, similarly, we have like constitutional protections in Mexico and Brazil that make it much more easy to bring cases on behalf of like animals or at least like to support animal welfare or rights. And so in that sense, it's like from the cases that we looked at standing, although there are obviously some standing requirements, it was rare for us to see a case that failed on standing and that did not go to the merits. Okay, I know we're over time and we do still have a few more questions okay, so maybe we take one last question. How are litigators partnering with communities to communicate the benefit of animal welfare? As a rescuer myself, we focus on children. Instilling values in a fun or productive way prepares them for a future dedication to animal welfare. Anyone want to take that one? Maybe Oswald or Val, since you're more familiar with your jurisdictions.
Well, in my jurisdiction, I would say advocates have to partner with the community even when they want to file a claim in a court. Because in order for you to allege harm before a court, say you are saying, well, this specific act is harming this specific type of an animal, you have to show injury. And in order for you to show injury, you have to have a human being who can actually allege personal injury on whatever act is being done. So you notice that most of the cases we have, which have been filed in the High Court by environmental law organizations claiming harm against animals, always have members of the community uh, cited as plaintiffs in those lawsuits. So in my opinion, you have to partner with them. And in some cases, those community members are the first people to actually come up with the claims. They approach the environmental law organization and say, look, there's something that is happening which we don't like. But obviously, your question is asking things that can be done to improve the relationship between the community and the litigants. And I would say maybe our education curriculums have to be upgraded to reflect the emerging issues in animal law. Because I'm sure you're aware that most education curriculums teach little kids about the importance of environmental protection, and that's okay. But I don't think, and I'm very sure that little has been done to advance the status of animals and educate little children about why animal welfare is important. And maybe that is something that actually needs to be done so that from a young age, all communities, all children, all students know that it's important to not only protect the environment, but go a step further and advance animal welfare and animal rights. So that is what I think needs to be done in Zimbabwe. I'm not sure what Val's perspective would be for Mexico.
Yes, I'm just gonna quickly chime in and mention, I think I went over this briefly, but with these new constitutional enshrinements of animals for Article 3, the inclusion of animal welfare and animal welfare protection will have to happen at all levels of school. So that's going to be quite an achievement. They will have to reform textbooks, educate professors on this. So yes, just wanted to say that, and it's quite a hopeful path for Mexico in that sense.
Thank you. All right, we're out of time. There is just like one final question that I'll quickly address because I think it'll be a nice wrap up to our webinar today. The question is, why should we care about animal rights, and how do animal rights in any way impact our concept of human rights? And this is a wonderful question because I think the one main takeaway, there were many, but like one of the main takeaways from our research is that animal rights and human rights are so interconnected, right? The way we treat animals in these industrialized farming operations doesn't just cause animal suffering, which, of course it does in many, many ways, but also causes environmental harm, also causes, also leads to public health risks. It damages human health. It damages, just it compromises worker safety. And so there's really no way for us to at least for factory farming, it's not even, we don't think it's a good idea even to like focus on one singular issue, but to approach factory farming holistically and try to address the various harms of this very damaging sector altogether. And yeah, so at least in this context and in many other contexts as well, animal rights are very deeply interconnected to human rights. And, safeguarding one will hopefully lead to the safeguarding of the other as well. And yeah, and with that, we will conclude. Thank you so much again to our wonderful panelists for being here today and for everybody who attended and asked all these great questions. Thank you so much.